So welcome, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit media briefing. I'm Jess Ralston, I'm Head of Energy at the ECIU, so I cover our power sector, homes and heating, and lately industry as well. So it's very interesting times for the debate on net zero and growth. This relatively new government campaigned on a manifesto that included clean power as one of its key pillars and missions. And since then, it's focused on growth and removing any perceived blockers to that growth. Um, and net zero has falsely been accused of being one of those pillars, in my opinion. And as Adriana will be able to tell you, we have some evidence that's coming out on Monday, which will prove that. There appears to be efforts by some quarters, including some political parties, to divorce the fact that climate change and to limit climate change and global warming, we must stop producing greenhouse gas emissions. And that's what net zero is. It's a scientific concept and not just an arbitrary target. And of course, with all the energy security concerns that have come with various wars and the gas crisis that we've seen, which started back in 2021, it's become quite apparent that not only is net zero essential to tackling climate change, but also to getting our energy independence back and shielding ourselves from future energy price shocks brought on by geopolitical tensions and controls from people like Putin. And net zero and policies to achieve it are likely to be continued to be discussed in the media and in political circles as the debate on how to unlock growth carries on up to the spending review and beyond that, as the gas crisis lingers and as we get closer to 2030. So during this briefing, we'll be discussing the ECIU's new report with analysis from CBI Economics and the Data City on the net zero economy, how it's grown over the last year and how this economy is distributed across Britain. We've carried out some deep dives into where the economic hotspots are for net zero, nationally, regionally, and more locally, how much they add in terms of GVA and jobs to the economy, and how productive the net zero economy is compared to other sectors in the economy as a whole. I don't want to give too much away before we hear from Adriana, who's going to talk us through the findings. But let's just say the findings are pretty stark on growth. So scrapping net zero or being less ambitious on that front is an interesting approach when growth is the focus. Now, to discuss all of this, we're going to first hear from Adriana, who's the manager at CBI Economics, who's going to talk us through the key findings of the report and where the net zero economy is strongest on a national, regional and constituency level. Then we're going to hear from Louise, who's chief economist at the CBI, who can talk us through what CBI members want to see from the new government to unlock growth and how heading towards net zero will benefit those businesses up and down the UK. And then thirdly, unbilled, but you're very welcome, Isaac. Isaac Lane is a second-year apprentice in the construction team at Siemens, who's actually getting on with delivering net zero on the ground and performing one of the green jobs that will help us see net zero and see that green growth. Isaac's just come down from Scotland, where he's been on a boat for the last couple of weeks, so thank you very much for making the time. And then finally, we're going to hear from Luke Murphy, who's the Labour MP for Basingstoke, who can set out the government's perspective on all of this and what it plans to do to make the most of our growing net zero economy. So we're going to hear from each of the panelists for 5 minutes and then over to the audience for questions. Please put them into the Q&A box at any time, and then I'll put them to the panelists for you. It's going to be recorded, so we'll send that out afterwards. And we'll also circulate the report and the press release recording just after this webinar. So I think that's everything from me. I'm going to head over to you, Adriana.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me today. Really excited to talk to you about the latest findings. This is the third iteration of our report, looking at the economic opportunities brought by the transition to net zero. And as Jess said, the findings are indeed very, very stark. The net zero economy is going from strength to strength every year. And it's just showing the opportunities that the transition is bringing, and where those opportunities are across the country as well. So I think what's important to understand as well is that we are very much focusing in defining the net zero economy. We're focusing on those niche and dedicated activities, and we're not talking about companies that are decarbonizing, in the process of decarbonizing their products or processes. And so, if you think about the additional investment that traditional sectors of the economy are making as well to decarbonize, the real value that the net zero economy essentially creates is much larger. But what we're doing here is we're trying to focus on those businesses that are predominantly sort of net zero focused. And it's a really small proportion of the business population, really. So we're talking about 22,800 businesses, majority of them being SMEs. And that's less than 0.1% of the business population. But nevertheless, they support more than 3% of the UK economy. So, you know, it's really interesting to see how a very small proportion of the economy is creating such significant value, and it's doing that up and down the country. So if I talk briefly about the value that the net zero economy is creating. So our latest figures show that these net zero businesses together generate nearly 29 billion in gross value added, and they directly employ 273,000 jobs, which is already, you know, a sector that's larger than the UK telecommunications sector as one comparator. But in addition to this value and these jobs directly supported by these net zero businesses, they do create value across the wider economy as well. So what we do is we also take into account how these activities are supporting businesses across more traditional sectors through the supply chain of these businesses, and also how the employee spending is also creating additional value throughout the economy. So in total, the net zero economy supports 3.3% of UK economic activity, which is approximately £83 billion in GVA. And that's 16% larger than the regional economy of the North East, just to provide a bit of a comparative scale as well. And this also supports nearly 1 million jobs, 951,000 jobs that are full-time, and they're quality jobs, highly paid jobs, and that's nearly 3% of total UK employment as well. So only, you know, less than 0.1% of the business population, a small number of businesses, but they're contributing significant amounts in terms of economic opportunities across the UK. And what's also really interesting is that the sector is really attractive to investment, and that just goes to show the opportunities that it potentially brings. So that's what's fueling this growth primarily. And again, just to remind you that it is not inclusive of additional investments that are being made throughout the wider economy as well for decarbonisation. So these businesses alone attracted £23 billion in investment funding and FDI in 2023-24. So this includes public and private sector funding received by net zero businesses, as well as £20 billion in foreign direct investment into these businesses. So quite significant levels of investment that they're attracting. And due to the high value nature of these activities as well, it's also worth noting that these are highly productive jobs. So on average, these jobs are 40% more productive than the UK average, and they pay more than £7,000 a year more in average than the average UK pay. So that's 15% more than the UK average. So to give you a few figures there as well, so it's £44,600 a year on average in salaries for jobs employed by net zero businesses, compared to 37,500 approximately for the UK average job. And I think one of the key focuses for us has been very much around where these opportunities are created. And there's some real success stories across the regions. And as Jess said, we've also looked at hotspots of net zero activity throughout the UK and looked at how that's supporting those local economies. And that's quite a significant success story in itself. Obviously, we know that the Scottish economy has quite significant strength around net zero activity, particularly renewables. But that's not the only part of the country that is benefiting from net zero activity. There are various pockets of activity throughout the north, but also in Wales and the West Midlands and the southwest. Quite a lot of this is outside of London and the southeast, actually. And in all of those regions, the net zero economy is growing quite significantly. So if we look at growth in Scotland, for example, there's been over 21% growth in the net zero economy since 2022, and that contributes over £9 billion in GVA just in Scotland alone, and supports more than 100,000 jobs there. So it's quite significant contributions in that region. And everywhere outside of London and the southeast as well, the sector is more productive than the region on average, at least 30% more productive. And if we look at, for example, Yorkshire and the Humber, it's even more so. So that's where in Yorkshire and the Humber, net zero businesses there are estimated to be 77% more productive than the regional average. Apologies, I thought my Zoom has closed, the window's disappeared, but I think I'm still here. And just to kind of talk through some of the hotspots as well of activity, I think it's important to notice that obviously every part of the country has its own strengths, particularly, whether that's around natural capital advantages, whether that's around research capabilities or industry know-how. And by leveraging those unique strengths that they have, many of them are poised to become significant hubs of sustainable economic activity. And that creates these hotspots that we've talked about, and has the potential to create more growth there, as well as obviously supporting environmental goals. And we found 6 hotspots that essentially contribute over £1 billion in economic value to those regions. So those hotspots are located all across the country, and essentially the way that we've defined those hotspots, they are clusters of adjacent local authorities, and they serve as major hubs for net zero initiatives. Just in the West Midlands, Yorkshire and the Humber and the Southwest, the hotspots that we've identified there contribute 16% of national net zero GVA, and just a few notable ones as well to kind of talk through. So I've already mentioned that Scotland is particularly strong there. Both the northeast of Scotland and the central belt of Scotland are hotspots that we've identified where there's significant clustering of net zero activity that's contributing significantly. The northeast of Scotland hotspot contributes 5% of the UK's net zero economy, and within this, Aberdeen is a real hub for net zero activity, and that continues to attract major renewable energy investments. Some notable projects include the Clyde wind farm, but also Aberdeen is home to the James Hutton Institute, which is a leading scientific research organisation whose research aims to tackle global challenges such as food security, biodiversity loss, and climate change. In Yorkshire and the Humberside hotspot as well, that also contributes over 5% of the UK's net zero economy, and it hosts over 2,000 net zero businesses. That hotspot has attracted £700 million in private investment in 2024 alone. And that includes significant companies like Siemens Gamesa, which Isaac is here representing today, which installed over 2 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity. And these are not, these hotspots are not just in the northern parts of the country. As I said, they are predominantly outside of London and the southeast, but they are also across parts of the West Midlands, Wales, the southwest of England as well. And they're all really key contributors to the UK's net zero economy. So the findings are really, really stark, and I think they're really interesting. And it just shows how the net zero economy has that potential to deliver transformative growth, and not just economic benefits, but social benefits across the UK as well. Because I think in previous reports, we've shown at constituency levels and on local authority levels as well, that there are really significant hotspots of activity in niche parts of the net zero economy all across the UK, and in some of the most deprived parts of the country as well. So it really has significant potential to drive growth through highly productive quality jobs and significant levels of investment that it helps to attract into the UK. So obviously more on this in the report itself. So I will leave it there. I just wanted to share a few headlines with you. But yes, Jess will share with you the full report and the press release with a few more headlines after this call.
Thanks so much, Adriana. It's so striking that net zero economy has grown by 10% when the rest of the economy has nowhere near achieved that level. It's an order of magnitude difference, really. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to pass over to Louise now, who's representing some of those net zero businesses as chief economist at the CBI. And yeah, over to you, Louise.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Jess. And yeah, firstly, thank you to ECIU for commissioning this work again from CBR Economics. It's been really great to work with them again. And obviously a big shout out to Adriana and the whole team for their excellent analysis as well. I think to put this work in the broader business context, it is really important because it underlines why for businesses up and down the country, net zero really needs to be at the heart of the UK's growth strategy. As we've been hearing, the UK is really well positioned to be a leader in green technologies. So this is not only a great growth and export opportunity, but importantly, I think, as Jess again was talking about earlier, global energy insecurity also makes accelerating net zero an economic necessity as well. Investments in clean domestic energy and decarbonisation will increase our resilience as a country and improve our competitiveness. And that's why net zero is really key. It's not just about the growth of the sector itself, but it's the fundamental role that it plays across the whole economy. On this first point, on the direct benefits of growth, again, Adriana's outlined these numbers really clearly. At 10%, the UK's net zero economy is growing so much faster than the rest of the economy. And achieving economy-wide decarbonisation will take colossal investment, primarily from the private sector, but this investment will drive growth. As well as I say, really underpinning a more resilient economy that is energy secure. Low carbon power, alternative fuel sources and energy efficiency, these measures will reduce the UK's reliance on volatile international markets, and that's really important for businesses, particularly at the moment. So they do see risks from slowing down the pace of transition. We know that that will cost more in the longer term. And the international competition for clean energy markets also means that there's a cost of falling behind in the race for more reliable, efficient energy. And I think that's where, the UK, as I say, is really well placed to be a world leader in a lot of these technologies. And we really need to make sure that we are making the most of those opportunities. I think the second thing that is really great from this work as well, again, that Adriana has talked about, is that it really outlines how communities and businesses of all sizes across the country really benefit from growing net zero investment, really making it core of the UK's industrial strategy. The regional footprint of the net zero economy with localized jobs and investment hotspots means that these economic growth opportunities are distributed across the whole of the UK. Like last year, the net zero economy grew in all 4 UK nations with high productivity jobs and SMEs really supported through those supply chains. And again, as Adriana talked about, that has direct impacts for those individuals and communities where these jobs and businesses are located. But it's also, when that money is being spent in the wider economy, it has that wider benefit as well. So for every £1 in value generated by the net zero economy, the report shows a further nearly £1.90 is generated in the wider economy. And I think that's really important to remember as well. Finally, I think in terms of what do we need to see from government and to make sure that we're making the most of these opportunities, I think it is really important that we continue to lead into this great growth opportunity for the UK. Policy stability and ambitious, well-developed frameworks are needed to decarbonise demand-side sectors to make sure that we are remaining really attractive places to invest further in the net zero economy. Last year, the Climate Change Committee said that only 1/3 of emissions reductions required to achieve the UK's 2030 target to meet a balanced pathway were covered by credible plans. The government's Clean Power 2030 strategy really signals that investment needs to decarbonise the power sector, but it's decarbonisation in sectors like transport, the built environment, industry and manufacturing that will also significantly grow the net zero economy and reduce UK emissions. So the government should really prioritise these sectors as part of the spending review and the industrial strategy. And as a CBI, I think we're calling for 3 key things that they can do. Firstly, to make sure that we are linking the UK and EU carbon pricing systems. Secondly, to make sure that we're really committing to additional targeted funding to help businesses, industry, transport, and buildings decarbonise. And thirdly, we need to make sure that we're really sticking to target dates and confirming a timeline for subsequent carbon capture and storage deployment as well. So I think it's really, really fantastic to see the growing strength of the net zero economy in the UK. We need to really continue to see that ambition to make sure we're taking advantage of those growth opportunities. And I say not only is it great for the growth mission in the UK, but it's also really fundamental to improving the resilience of the UK, and bringing down the cost of energy will make the UK more competitive as well.
Thanks, Louise. Many insights there from the business perspective. I'm going to hand over to Isaac now, Isaac Blaine, who's a second-year apprentice at Siemens Gamesa, I think it said. I think you're in the construction team there, Isaac. So yeah, over to you to tell us a bit about what it's like being in one of these green jobs and delivering net zero on the ground.
I mean, yeah, I'm currently second-year apprenticeship Siemens, and it's pretty good. It's really nice just to be in like a job that's really on the front edge and leading edge of green energies, and it creates a lot of job opportunities like up and down the country. Siemens Gamesa specifically, building these wind turbines. It's good.
And can you tell us a bit about what you've been up to on the boat? I'm fascinated from a personal point.
So I'm in the commissioning team. So this team basically, there's another team that builds the turbines offshore, and I'm on the commissioning team. And basically, after they've built the main structure of the turbines, me and a group of other people go up turbine, and we work off a list and basically do the last jobs to make sure the turbine's up and running, ready to produce renewable energies for the country. Yeah. Sweet.
And how much of a future do you see in that industry? Can you see it being a job for the rest of your life, or do you think it'll be more short-lived?
I think it's a very long-term career. I mean, for every stage of wind turbine production, it was a fast-growing sector, and it's very diverse with research, manufacturing, installation, and maintenance with the turbines. And because of the rate it's growing, it's a very long-term career path.
Very good. Sounds like you're set.
Yeah.
Thanks. Just a reminder to everyone as well, please put your questions in the Q&A box as and when you think of them, and then we can come after all the panelists have given their opening remarks. Thank you very much, Isaac. I'm going to head to you now, Luke, who is Labour MP for Basingstoke.
Thanks very much, and yeah, thanks to ECIU for inviting me, and congrats to ECIU and CBI on the fantastic research and report and analysis. I mean, I guess from my perspective, I think the report kind of just reinforces what the government has been saying and what Labour has been committed to. Was committed to in its manifesto, and obviously work I've worked on for a number of years. That the clean transition and economic growth kind of definitively go hand in hand. It is the industrial opportunity of the 21st century. There's major growth opportunities, and I think I'll come on to say a bit about why that's so important politically. But it's not just, I think, as Adriana and Jess and Louise have said, about just one kind of sector. This is also about enabling other sectors to be successful. If we want to have if we want AI to be to be a huge growth sector, that is going to rely on having a renewable powered grid and a future kind of economy that is electric. So it really is I think the foundation of our future economic success. And I think what's so exciting and important, both economically but also politically, I think is that, as the report highlights, and why it is at the heart of our growth mission and programme, is just the number of aspects of the objectives that it meets. Yes, there's the broader kind of we've been really clear that our number one ambition is growth. That's the only way in which we're going to be able to pay for our public and support our public services and defence, etc. And that's why it's an overwhelming priority. But clean energy and the clean economy has got to be at the heart of that. But it's about the secure jobs, which you've highlighted, jobs that pay more in many cases than other sectors. We have a massive productivity issue within and long-standing that has been talked about politically for decades, and this can help us overcome that. But also the point around it being regionalised. We know we've got one of the most unequal economies in the Western world, and the net zero transition can help us overcome that, rebalance, and really drive not just economic growth, but growth that is productive, growth that is sustainable, and growth that can lift regions as well as the economy as a whole. And I certainly see that in my own constituency. Just listening to Isaac there, like talking about the pride of being part of a cutting edge industry as an apprentice. I've got the Basingstoke College of Technology, which trains up people in similar industries on heat pumps and electric vehicles. We've got an EV centre here, and the pride that they have, not just in the fact that they're pursuing a career that they know will be long lasting, but also that is at the kind of the forefront of the kind of economic future, but also doing something more in terms of tackling climate change. And I think I met some of Isaac's, and not maybe direct colleagues, when I visited Lowestoft recently, and Siemens Gamesa and EDF, some other apprentices, including a granddaughter who works on wind farms for, I think it was for Siemens, or it might have been EDF, I'm not sure, but her grandfather had worked in the oil industry offshore, and she takes a great deal of pride in that. And I think it's not just about the future economic opportunities, it's also providing those transition opportunities for those in fossil fuel industries as well. And I think the political and economic cost of not pursuing this further and not having it at the heart of growth is losing some of the opportunities that we otherwise could have had. I think the report is really good at setting out just what a significant contribution it is already making to our economy. But other research, certainly in my previous role, if I'm allowed to mention another think tank, IPPR, showed that actually the contribution to the UK economy was significant, but it was a third. It was 50% less than that in the EU, and less than half of Sweden and Denmark. For example, we could have created 100,000 more jobs in the wind industry if we had followed Denmark's example and built up domestic manufacturing. So there are huge economic costs of not seeing this transition as an economic opportunity, which is why I think it's so important that the government has made the 2030 mission such a central part of this government, but that is also combined with the industrial strategy. The industrial strategy and energy policy have to work hand in hand to make sure that we're maximising the economic opportunities of the transition. That's why I'm really proud that we've got the industrial strategy in place, that clean energy is at the heart of that. And I've been lucky enough to hear from Sarah Jones, Johnny Reynolds, Keir Starmer and Rachel talk very emphatically about how it is part of that, and how the industrial strategy's got to support that and work hand in hand with our energy policy as well. So I think that's incredibly important. I think it's also worth recognizing that with a slight moment of risk, I think we've been used to maybe or comforted by a greater cross-party consensus than perhaps we're seeing at the moment. I have been in Westminster and heard sort of shadow ministers, sort of Greg Smith from the Conservatives attacking electric vehicles, and Joy Morrissey talking about scrapping renewables levies and attacking renewables as being at the whims of the weather, as well as reform arguing for policies that would essentially increase our energy bills and shut off the many kind of economic benefits we're going to get from net zero. And I think actually, what I want to see, and I think the government is determined to do it, is to ensure that it remains at the heart of our growth mission, because we are at a slightly dangerous moment. And we only need to look to see what's going on with Ukraine and what's happened in the past, and other people have mentioned it, is that this isn't just about economic growth, it's also about energy security. We don't want to risk those higher and volatile bills that we'll get if we continue to rely on fossil fuels. We don't want Putin's boot remaining on our neck. And it's not just about energy security, it is about economic security and economic growth as well, because we're not going to be able to secure our economy, empower our economy, if our energy isn't secure. So I think what this report does is tells a really powerful story about the contribution net zero is already making, the potential benefits in the future, but there's also the added points, as I think others have mentioned, of that essential energy security that we need as well. So, and I would agree with many of the points that have been made, just finally, that others have made around the need to ensure that we have a focus on sectors outside energy. When we think about transport, when we think about heat as well, they're a key part of the transition and they're a key part of the jobs story as well. I think I've taken up more than enough time, so I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Luke. Really interesting. We've got a couple of questions that have come in, one from Jeff Lean and one from Damien Carrington. So we'll get to them in just 1 minute. But first of all, I want to abuse my power as the chair and ask a question myself first. And that's probably, well, we've seen so much about net zero in the news. And as Luke hinted at, some of the political parties are moving away from ambition on net zero and saying that net zero is damaging growth. And, clearly the evidence says the opposite. So perhaps Luke and Louise, you might want to answer this first. But are you surprised to see so much growth in the net zero economy over the last year, 10%, considering all of what I would consider to be negative headlines around net zero and growth? Is that surprising to you? Or do you think that the noise being created around this is simply just noise?
I'll let Louise go first.
So polite, yeah. Thanks, Louise.
Just go first on it. So, I think, when I talk to business up and down the country, and net zero and the benefits of kind of green growth is something that we as an organisation have talked about, for years, and we've always had a big business presence, for example, at the kind of COP summits and things like that. I think I'm not personally surprised, because I kind of see some of these great businesses, the way that the UK is just really set up to take advantage of some of these opportunities, in terms of the knowledge that we have in the UK around our, just the natural attributes that we have and the benefits that we've been able to take from that, for example, from offshore wind and things like that. But I think it is definitely something that we need to shout about a lot more. And I think, again, that is where this report is so useful and so powerful, because it really provides that strong evidence base to show the benefits that are kind of material in the UK as of now. Because I think, there are lots of other reports and previous work that we've done to show the benefits, in the future. And I think that is absolutely right. And where it's important that we should be able to get even greater benefits if we continue to invest in this transition, but actually saying there are benefits for the UK economy, for people and communities, and good quality jobs right now as well. And I think that is something that is really important. I think is one of the big messages from this report.
Yeah, and I think similarly, I think that there is I wouldn't want to say anything is inevitable, because nothing is inevitable, and obviously the speed at which we go will make a huge difference, and what policies are in place to maximise the economic value are clearly important. But I think I think there was a lot of concern, for example, in just taking an example of Donald Trump's first term in America, that there would be a complete halt to climate action and investment. But actually there was a kind of remorseless logic amongst a lot of businesses that no matter what necessarily the noise might be being made, that there was a huge business opportunity here, and businesses and the private sector will always invest in those opportunities if they can see them. And I think companies and many businesses can see that now, which is why they're investing in it, which is why the sector is growing. I think what is an issue is that the noise sometimes can detract and prevent us making even more of it. So, it could have that growth could have been even larger if we hadn't had some of that noise or some of the kind of stop-start policy changes that we had under previous government. So I think I'm not surprised, because I think so many companies see the economic opportunity domestically for export, for British businesses. And exactly as Louise said, we've got a huge amount of strengths in the UK, a huge opportunity to take advantage of it. And I think this should be not a wake-up call, but a kind of a reminder that the more we do, the more we're going to be able to take that opportunity, and the more benefit we're going to be able to bring to our economy.
That's great. Thank you both. Yeah, definitely resonates with a lot of the energy industry that I speak to. They're saying policy certainty, but also narrative certainty from the government is really important. So we've had a few questions from the audience. Jeff Lean, I'm going to allow you to talk. Hello, Jeff.
Thanks. Yeah, very interesting and encouraging what Luke said. I do have to say that the policy messaging and the narrative doesn't seem to be very consistent from government at the moment, and coming down from 28 million a year to growth is much more important than net zero, as the Chancellor said in Davos, seems to be quite a stop after a start. So I was just wondering, to elaborate on that, and what the position in Number 10 really is. You have all these briefings coming out from Number 10, it seems, against Ed Miliband, and some quite explicit stuff from Wes Streeting and others. It does seem an awful mess. So I was wondering both if Luke could reassure me further, and actually more, what response Louise gets when she goes to government to make the point she very eloquently makes. What response is she getting from the Treasury and from the government itself, so we can go read on what really is going on.
Thank you, Jeff. Luke, over to you first, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rachel has been clear that, I mean, she said over and over again as Chancellor and when she was Shadow Chancellor, that this sector is the growth opportunity of the 21st century. I think she said in her recent speech that there is no trade-off between economic growth and net zero, and that they go hand in hand. And the fact that the clean energy mission is such a central part of our agenda, there might be some noises off in newspapers, but fundamentally, I mean, one of the things that I find so encouraging is that I've now, obviously I'm on the Energy Security and Net Zero Committee. I obviously meet with a lot of businesses. I've met with a fair few now that have said, well, we were skeptical about the 2030 target, and they still think it's at the upper end of, ambitious, but they have been genuinely surprised at how quickly the government and the department have been able to move to sweep away barriers. And I think actually that, the actions speak louder than the words. The speed with which we've moved to remove the onshore wind ban, to set up GB Energy, to take decisions on solar is what should, define people's view of how seriously it's taken. It remains at the heart of government. There remains a significant commitment in Number 10 from Keir, from Rachel, from Ed, from Johnny Reynolds, in charge of industrial strategy as well. And there's an extremely strong cohort of MPs who are very focused on clean and sustainable growth as well, who are, egging the government on to deliver on this, because we know what it will deliver locally, and we know what it will deliver for the economy and politically as well.
Thanks, Luke. And then I think there was a secondary question, Louise. What sort of response do you get from the likes of the Treasury when you go in and talk about net zero?
So I think, we've had some really encouraging conversations with them. I think particularly, like you say, in terms of highlighting those opportunities around growth. And I think the big discussion with them really is about what are the respective roles of government and businesses, and actually where can we work constructively together. So, some of those conversations that we had, I suppose going back to when they were opposition, was the importance of actually, if we're going to make progress on this journey and one of the fundamental things that a lot of businesses in this space needed to grow the green economy, but also to decarbonize themselves, was around reforming the planning system and grid connectivity. And we've seen a lot of action in that space over the last couple of months. There is definitely more to do, but I think things like that really just remove some of the barriers that have been in place over the last few years to move quicker on this journey. And I think really now it's going forward, thinking about how we can make sure we have got those right frameworks between business and government. So again, it's some of those really practical discussions again around some of the decisions that have been sitting on ministers' desks for things like announcements on Sizewell C, but also around, as I say, one of the big things that we need to see is the next programme around the funding mechanisms for carbon capture and storage. So I think we're very aligned on those kind of top level objectives and ambitions, and it's really about talking to them about the detail and what we need to see in place and the certainty that businesses need to see in some areas so that they can deploy a lot of this investment that we're talking about. But that enthusiasm in the business community around the net zero opportunities is very real, and I think it's about making the most of that.
Thank you, Louise. We've got a question from Damien Carrington at The Guardian. And Adriana, the first one is technical. So it says, why did you use GVA rather than GDP? And can we have the GDP growth compared to the whole economy? And then there's a secondary question, which might be interesting again for you, Luke, and maybe Isaac, actually. Do you think some of the rhetoric, some of what the Prime Minister's been saying around eco-zealots, I'm never actually sure what that means, but eco-zealots and the Chancellor around bats and newts preventing growth and things like HS2, and whether that damages the net zero economy. So Adriana, over to you first about the technical side, and then I'll go to you, Luke and Isaac, about whether you think what the Prime Minister says impacts what happens on the ground.
Sure, thank you. So on the question about GVA versus GDP, we very deliberately used gross value added because that captures the value that does create, well, the value that is additional throughout the economy, that sort of is recirculated throughout the economy, and not the value of production. So the scale of production, which includes production costs, and that includes things that are being imported as well in order to produce output, they're being excluded from the analysis. And that's because we are focused on very much, what is that additional value that is created throughout the economy? So the incomes and the profits and investments that are being sort of recirculated throughout the economy, spent with and supporting other goods and services and other activity, and creating jobs rather than sunk costs, essentially. So GDP is a larger figure than GVA, but that just is the difference is really in those costs of production that are being included. We do also have those figures, so we can provide them if they would be useful, but we haven't reported them in the report for that reason.
Thank you. And then Luke and Isaac, do you think what some of the Prime Minister says, and the Chancellor as well, damages the net zero economy? Luke, do you want to go first?
I think narrative and story and messaging is always important. I mean, I think what's clear. I think you could say around the infrastructure and planning, and I think what one of my colleagues or two of my colleagues wrote quite eloquently about this, Polly Billington and Chris Curtis, for example, around planning and some of the infrastructure, is that actually the desire to build the infrastructure and restore nature or protect nature, our current system isn't really working for either. We're not building the homes or the infrastructure we need, and we're not protecting nature. And I think some of the language might be a bit pointed, but I think it's trying to highlight that actually it's not working for and what we need to do. And I absolutely believe we can build the infrastructure we need. Of course, there's always going to be some trade-offs locally. We can't pretend we're in a world with no trade-offs. But I fundamentally believe we can build the infrastructure and the homes we need while also restoring nature. And I think that's what the Prime Minister has been trying to highlight. I think the most important thing, as I said earlier, is around actions. I mean, you can focus on that, but you could also focus on the fact that Keir was one of the only world leaders to go to COP. That we've put climate leadership at the heart of our agenda and the meeting the 2030 clean power target is such a central part, one of our key missions, one of our key manifesto commitments. So I would put more stock in those actions, that kind of centrality of climate leadership and the policy missions and commitments that we've got, than some of the other points that I think are trying to highlight some of the failures of the current system that don't either deliver for climate and nature or our other ambitions to build the infrastructure and homes we need.
Thank you, Luke. And Isaac, I wonder if some of what the Prime Minister's saying and some of what the Chancellor's saying, do you hear that when you're having your conversations with whoever it is, clients or within your team at Siemens? Does that filter down to what you're saying on the ground, and does that have any impact on the work that you do, or are you just carrying on regardless, ploughing on with delivering on the ground?
From my perspective, we're just carrying on building these wind farms. I mean, there's a lot going up right now. I think Moray West up in Scotland has just been built. I'm on Current Energy, and there's Sophia going on just in Hull. And from my experience, the comments often do trickle down from the client side, where it might be asking more questions and maybe a bit more unease. But generally, these wind farms are still getting built, and it's not affecting me on a day-to-day basis at all. And it's more people who are managing the project, I would say. But for me personally,
really interesting that these things are carrying on regardless. Rebecca, I see you put your question in the chat, but I'll allow you to talk if you want to just ask it verbally. I like giving you the power to speak.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I didn't know whether I could just put it in the chat or not. Yeah, so this is just more of a technical point for Adriana. When it comes to kind of stickier industries where there's debate around how they fit into net zero or their effectiveness, how did you approach that? For example, did you include Drax and biomass burning as net zero? Did you include sort of the nascent carbon credits market in the analysis? That would be interesting to hear about. And then for Luke and Louise, can I ask your opinion about airport expansion and how this could send mixed messages to businesses and the public from a government that says it's committed to climate action?
Thank you so much, Rebecca, from PA, by the way.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, so happy to take the first question. So the Data City defines the net zero economy using quite a complex algorithm in which has some criteria around the types of activities that it includes, and also scores businesses on a kind of a relevance to that criteria. So essentially, you pull out certain types of activities, and the report has an appendix which lists the different sort of subsectors that we've defined within the net zero economy, and it doesn't include things like the carbon credits market, and we haven't included traditional oil and gas companies or energy companies. We have focused very much on the ones that had the highest sort of score around net zero activity, so where those activities are very much dedicated to net zero activity, rather than where there's a bit of a grey line, or where a company is kind of transitioning, is in the process of transitioning, and are still sort of they've got a mix of kind of products and processes that are net zero and not net zero. So we've taken the approach of essentially excluding the ones where there's still quite a significant level of fossil fuel activity or not net zero activity within a company. So companies like Drax, for example, will have been excluded from the analysis. What this does mean is that essentially we are potentially underestimating the scale of the net zero economy. And as those companies like Drax continue to transition as well, and many others, they will obviously eventually become part of the net zero economy themselves, but that is a longer term process. So I think because we wanted to sort of avoid overestimating activity and capturing not net zero related activity, we've taken that strict approach of excluding anything that is a bit unsure or unclear, and we had set criteria around filtering businesses.
Thank you. And then Luke and Louise, Rebecca also had a question about airport expansion and whether that sends mixed messages.
I think provided you're clear that expansion, and I think the party has been, and the government has been clear that any expansion has got to be compliant with our legally binding climate commitments. No, I don't think it does. I think, from my perspective, any expansion's got to be compatible with climate change commitments, can't worsen noise pollution or air pollution, and it's got to provide economic benefit to all parts of the UK. So, and that's the test for any project that's brought forward. It's got to be able to meet our legally binding climate targets, and it's now for Heathrow to bring forward that. And I think Heidi Alexander, as the Secretary of State, who will be in a quasi-judicial role in this, has been clear that she will need to assess any proposal against those commitments.
Thank you, Luke. Louise, have you got any thoughts on airport expansion?
Yeah, I mean, I'd really kind of echo that. So, I mean, I think whenever we're talking about growth, we are talking about sustainable growth. And I think for the most part, as we've been talking about today, net zero and growth really go hand in hand. But there will be those conversations to have around specific projects and where there might be kind of trade-offs. But I know in our conversations with Heathrow, they are very clear that this will only go ahead if it meets the rules on noise, on air quality, on carbon. And I think it's really important to think about how, alongside the growth ambitions, we're really supporting the sector in their own efforts to decarbonise as well. I think if you're looking at the growth for the UK economy in that global context, this is greater airport capacity that is needed kind of in Europe. It happens in the UK, or it will happen elsewhere. And I think it's much better that happens in the UK with an industry that is looking to really be at the forefront of that decarbonisation as well. So I think, we can have grown-up conversations around those things. And I think it's about, as I say, again, industry and government really working together.
Thanks both. Hopefully that helps, Rebecca. We've only got a few minutes left, but I wanted to ask a question which is perhaps zoomed out a little bit. We're seeing, obviously, Trump coming into the US presidency. They're rolling back on lots of their climate agreements. We don't know what's going to happen with IRA yet, the Inflation Reduction Act. Also across the EU, we're seeing some, like in Germany, for example, some perhaps moving away from net zero. And I just wonder, Louise, maybe this is one for you. Do you think that represents an opportunity for the UK, going more ambitious and doing things faster than other countries? Does that leave us with an opportunity?
I think absolutely it does. I mean, I think, a year or two ago when we had the US introduce the IRA scheme, we had a lot of interest from businesses, from investment, really looking to the US as an attractive investment proposition, because they are interested in growing the net zero economy. So actually, if unfortunately, that ambition perhaps isn't there so much in the US, I think that is an opportunity for the UK to really have that clear calling card that this is an industry that we are investing in, that we are championing, and we see those benefits to growth. And I think, like I say, that is not just because of the benefits it can bring to the UK economy and around the export opportunities for that, and in expanding that exporting that technology, but also if we, again, thinking about just businesses based in the UK, net zero is important because we do need to think about how we can have much cleaner sources of energy in the UK, much lower energy costs, which will make the UK longer term more competitive and more resilient. So I think, the net zero targets, need to be global objectives, and obviously there's a whole kind of conversation around that. But even if other countries were to move away, I think there are very clear needs and benefits for the UK continuing to push ahead on that journey and to be a world leader in this space as well.
Thanks, Louise. And then maybe one final question from me, and sorry, Isaac, I don't know if this is maybe a bit mean, but what do you think the government can do to get more people into green jobs? How can it grow the sector that you're in, or how can it help create those opportunities? How did you get into this job? Can it do more of what you did? How do you think the government can help people who perhaps already work in oil and gas or want to get into working in renewables? How can they do that?
I think first of all, I think it stems from funding. So being offshore, obviously you work with a lot of people who are from oil and gas. So if there is more funding to begin with, more people will transition from the oil and gas industry into offshore wind farms. And additionally, I think if the government made a big push to advertise these type of jobs, and the different career paths you could make, it would really help a lot. Because I feel like right now it's currently a niche. It's a niche area, a niche job opportunity, and there is a lot of room to expand and grow. And I don't think many people really know about it much or all about it. So I think if the government does a big push for funding and advertising for around this sector, it'd be pretty good.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually did geology, and I was told that if you do geology, all the jobs are just in oil and gas. And then when I got to like second or third year, actually it turned out all the oil and gas companies said actually the future's in renewables. So that was really interesting. I think that it's only going to get more like that, right? Like there's only going to be more and more jobs in this industry. So maybe one to take away to your colleagues, Luke. I think we'll wrap up there unless there's any other questions from the audience. I don't think there is. But just to say, as we've already mentioned, the report from commissioned by the ECIU, but with analysis from CBI Economics and the Data City, that comes off embargo on Monday. But we'll be sending it out with a press release and a recording of this webinar in a few minutes. And thank you very much to all of our panelists for all of your expertise, your wisdom, and of course your time. We really do appreciate you coming along. If any of the attendees have any follow-up questions or media requests, do get in touch with my colleague George, who should be on some of the emails that you've already had about this. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, and look forward to seeing you all soon. And yeah, keep tuned in for the report on Monday.